Hi, I'm Eliza DeLite and I'm a burlesque performer based in London, England. Today I am here to talk to you all about one of my favourite acts and an act that I recently revamped. I'm very proud of. I get a lot of questions about the costume, a lot of questions about the act. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you enjoy this little video series that I am making for you today. In this episode, I'm going to talk a bit about my background and how it's informed decisions that I've made as a burlesque performer. And I'm going to look at the original costume that I used for this Ziegfeld Girl act, what I loved about it, and some of the things that were not so great about this costume. Hold on to your hats, folks, because we are going to take a deep dive into costuming for burlesque and resurrecting a Hollywood icon. So I grew up with a passion in performance and art, and I studied various subjects in these areas growing up, everything from contemporary dance to fine art to photography to graphic design to theatre. And together these interests have given me the perfect footing for becoming the burlesque performer that I am today. One of the first things that inspired me, I had these two fantastic books of images from Vogue photo shoots going all the way back to the 1940s. And these images really captured my imagination. And I looked to the beautiful, stunning, powerful women in these images, and I wanted to recreate that. And that's how I wanted to look. I tried to capture this magic that you got through these beautiful editorial images that you were seeing back in the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s. And really that was my first exposure to that era of ultimate glamour, when women were these incredibly well put together, polished creatures who held themselves with this elegance and this power. That is probably one of the things that led me to where I am now. All my years of studying art and performance and photography and film suddenly all came crashing together and made perfect sense. These were things that I could tie into being a burlesque performer. There are many important aspects to being a burlesque performer, and one of those things is costume, and it's something that people get quite excited about. And I get asked a lot of questions about my costumes, and I'm here today to talk to you about one very specific costume, and it is my Hedy Ziegfeld Girl costume that you can see here. But before I can tell you about the new costume that I use today, let me take you back and tell you all about how the act began. Back in 2012, I was in a vintage shop in Nottingham when I came across the most incredible pair of original 1950s dance costumes. They were like nothing I'd ever seen before in the flesh, and they were not very expensive either, so I bought them both. I started to delve a little deeper into looking at old Hollywood costumes for movie musicals and dance numbers. So one of the places I look to for inspiration is my extensive collection of old Hollywood movie magazines, which have some beautiful photos of old Hollywood showgirls and the magnificent costumes that they got to wear. And I have looked to these for many years for inspiration. Something that I pay very close attention to when I am looking at these images of old Hollywood costumes are things like the silhouettes that you see, the finishes in terms of fabrics used, embellishments used, and the overall aesthetic. And it's something that I've tried very hard over the years to capture in my own costumes in an attempt to bring back that old Hollywood magic. It was through looking back at all these old movie musicals that I finally discovered Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr is an inspirational woman for many reasons. She was often considered one of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, but at the same time, she was also an incredible scientist, and she invented a technology which today modern Wi-Fi is based on. When I first saw that magical clip of Hedy Lamarr walking out onto the stage in Ziegfeld Girl, I was just absolutely blown away. I decided that this was the perfect opportunity to use these dance costumes that I had found. So this is my original Ziegfeld Girl costume, which dates back to 2012. And this was the costume that I found in the vintage store in Nottingham. As I mentioned, there were actually two costumes, but one of them unfortunately was too small for me. However, the other one fitted perfectly. It did not quite look like this when I found it. I did do a little bit of work to it myself, including all of the beaded fringing, which I hand beaded before realizing that you could buy beaded trim. So that was a lesson learned. I also added all the extra rhinestone trim, and with the bustle at the back, which is detachable, I took the net from one of the two matching bustles and I doubled up the net so that this was twice as thick. And what I really love about this net is it fades. I don't know if you can see. It fades all the way to a lovely dark blue at the bottom. And this net is one of the things I love most about this costume, because there's something just really magical about the slightly faded blue tulle there. For a while, this was one of my most requested acts. I loved how this costume instantly made me feel like I was in my own 1940s Hollywood movie. There are still things about this costume that I love, and when I watch the footage back, I do still miss. I loved how playful the tulle bustle was on stage, and also showering the audience and the stage with glitter when I took my gloves off. Sadly, sort of frowned upon now, and not something I do anymore because it is a little bit hazardous for the next performers, and not something that stage managers are particularly keen on cleaning up. So, but it was fun. As lovely as this costume was, it was not without its flaws. This costume has undergone a number of new additions, upgrades, etc. One of the biggest was the headdress I had made in 2013, which was incredibly light, relatively easy to pack, but it was tall and it wobbled a lot. In some ways, it did force me to really think about my posture and how I was holding myself, but it also prevented me from really being able to throw myself into the choreography. I made these stars and tulle pom-poms, which I strung on fishing wire. Had them hanging from my arms, and I thought that they would look quite cool. However, they did become quite a nuisance to perform with on stage. They regularly got tangled up when I spun around, and the little cords that I had them tied on with didn't always come undone when I wanted them to, which was a bit frustrating. Eventually I realised that using snaps to attach them to my gloves would be a much better idea, and definitely made it easier to strip out of on stage. I've definitely learnt some lessons from this original costume. Lessons which have informed not only choices that I've made with the new version, but also with almost every costume that I've made since. One of the number one causes of the slow deterioration of this costume was caused by the claw set rhinestone trim which I had sewn on the top. It just snagged on everything. Anything that could be snagged got snagged. The tulle bustle, the gloves, the rest of the costume. It was just a bit of a nightmare, as lovely as it looked. And not only was it snagging the fabric, but every time it caught on the fabric, it was pulling the rhinestone trim away, and I was continuously having to re-stitch it into place. This costume, unfortunately, is not in the best shape, and it has definitely seen better days. So, of course, I was very sad to have to make the decision to retire this costume, but I will probably never get rid of it. I will always keep it and treasure it because it means quite a lot to me. Nothing can beat the magic of this original 1950s showgirl costume. I love it very much. In the next episode, I'm going to be looking at the beginnings of recreating this costume. I'm going to talk about how I worked with my dressmaker, Louise Holland McCormack, and how we approached the mammoth task of recreating that iconic Hedy Lamarr dress.